The valley was on fire. Tracer rounds cut the night, and a Black Hawk dropped into a landing zone already collapsing under enemy guns. Pinned against the ridge, a Navy SEAL commander lay bleeding out, his team seconds from being overrun. Over the radio, some doubted she could lead the charge. "Lane won't last 5 minutes in that kill zone," a voice muttered. But out of the smoke, Staff Sergeant Harper Lane proved them wrong. She wasn't supposed to survive. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Smoke curled through the broken valley. Staff Sergeant Harper Lane had Cole Mason slung across her back, his weight pressing into her shoulders, his blood seeping into her uniform. Gunfire snapped all around, echoing off the rocks. She didn't slow. Each step was a battle. But she kept moving, carrying the wounded SEAL commander through the storm. Only minutes earlier, the base had been calm. Fort Granite, deep inside Redwood Basin, hummed with the steady rhythm of patrols and radio chatter. Harper was running her team across the eastern perimeter, boots crunching against gravel as she checked fighting positions. She had been in country long enough to know that quiet never lasted. Her radio hissed with sudden static. A new voice cut in, tight and urgent. "This is Echo Team. Commander down. Multiple casualties. Pinned in Sector 9. Immediate reinforcements required." The message repeated, rushed and sharp. It was the kind of call that froze even seasoned soldiers for half a breath. Harper didn't pause. She keyed her mic and looked back at her Rangers. "You heard it. Gear up. We're moving." The order rolled from her throat with certainty. They trusted her. In 2 tours, she had proven that hesitation was the one thing she never carried into combat. Platoon Sergeant Marcus Doyle came across the channel. "Lane, you're the closest. Your lead assault element. Get to Echo and pull them out." His voice was steady, but the weight of what he asked was clear. They would be running headfirst into a fight designed to kill Americans. Within minutes, Harper's squad was loading into a UH-60 Black Hawk. The rotor spun dust into the air, whipping at her face as she climbed aboard. She sat against the wall, rifle across her lap, eyes locked on the map glowing faintly in her hands. 18 minutes of flight time. 18 minutes until they were in it. The ride cut low through the mountains, jagged peaks flashing past in quick bursts. Harper studied every contour line. The terrain favored the defenders, high ridges, narrow draws, and caves that could hide entire platoons. Her jaw tightened. The SEALs had walked into a trap, and her squad would have to fight them out. 2 minutes, the pilot called over comms. The valley ahead was already alive with sound. Gunfire cracked in uneven bursts, heavier weapons echoing like thunderclaps. Harper inhaled once, slow and sharp, centering herself. "We go in hard. Cover each other. We bring everyone out. No mistakes." The helicopter dropped fast toward a clearing barely large enough to fit its frame. As the skids touched down, the hillside erupted. Tracers streaked red across the dusk, hammering into the dirt around the LZ. Bullets chewed through brush. Harper's squad leapt out, weapons barking instantly, forming a quick perimeter. Contact Front Specialist Vega shouted, his automatic rifle already lighting up the ridge. Harper saw muzzle flashes stitched across the slope. The enemy had dug in, overlapping fields of fire, angles that punished every exposed movement. They were ready for this landing. "Suppress and move," Harper snapped, pushing forward in short bursts. Fire and maneuver cover, dash, drop. It was drilled into every Ranger, but under live fire, it took raw grit to execute. Dirt spat around her boots as rounds skipped low. She dropped to a knee, returned 3 clean shots, and signaled her team to push up. The air reeked of cordite and smoke. Every advance meant crossing open ground. Harper crawled, sprinted, and rolled behind what little cover the rocky slope offered. She raised her rifle, sighted a fighter trying to flank their line and squeezed. He fell back into the dust, and her squad surged another 20 yards. Radio crackled again. Corporal Nguyen, her point man, shouted, eyes on Echo, team half a click forward. Boxed in tight. I see Mason. He's bleeding bad. Harper pressed forward, breath burning in her lungs. The SEALs were huddled behind shattered stone, 3 firing, 1 dragging a wounded man. And in the center, Cole Mason, face pale, chest stained crimson, still clutching his weapon, though his strength was gone. The insurgents pressed from 3 sides. If they broke through, Echo would be gone in minutes. Harper saw no safe retreat. There was only one option. We punched through. Straight shot. She rose from cover and charged. Her squad followed, pouring fire into the ridgeline. Explosions tore the slope as grenades went out in arcs. The valley thundered with overlapping gunfire. Harper kept moving, rifle tight, firing short, controlled bursts. She dropped 2 more fighters, pivoted, and cut down another who rose behind a rock outcrop. Then came the crack of a round too close. Private Ellis, youngest in the squad, took the hit to the chest. He staggered, still firing, then forced himself forward, laying down suppressive bursts that bought the others precious seconds. Harper's shout tore across the din. Keep moving. Ellis went down hard, his sacrifice carving the path open. The Rangers burst into the SEAL perimeter. Harper slid beside Mason, dropping her pack. His breathing was ragged, eyes half-focused. She tore open a pressure bandage and pressed it against the wound. Commander Mason, I'm Lane. We're getting you out. Mason tried to speak, his lips cracked and dry. Only fragments came through. My men, don't leave them. You're all coming, Harper said firmly. Her squad locked down firing positions, answering each enemy burst with disciplined volleys. She hooked her arm under Mason's shoulders and pulled him upright. His weight hit her hard, but she steadied, shifting him across her back in a fireman's carry. Bullets snapped past as she rose. One clipped the dirt at her feet, another hissed by her ear. Still, she ran, Mason's blood soaked into her vest, warm against the cold sweat dripping down her spine. She staggered forward, her Rangers clearing a corridor with unrelenting fire. The radio screamed, "Bird inbound." 30 seconds, Harper pushed harder. Each step was thunder in her chest. The world narrowed to the landing zone, the dust cloud rising as the helicopter swept back in under fire. Her squad fell back in disciplined bounds, grenades covering their retreat. The SEAL survivors moved with them, dragging their own wounded. The ground shook as enemy mortars struck too close, shrapnel biting the earth. Harper reached the skids first, slamming Mason into the arms of waiting medics. She turned, rifle still up, as the last of her squad piled aboard. One seat was empty, Ellis's. She bit back the fire in her throat. The bird lifted under a storm of rounds, banking hard out of the valley. Through the open door, Harper looked down. Smoke rolled through Redwood Basin, black and unforgiving. Below, the enemy still swarmed the ridges, furious at their escape. She exhaled once, steady, and finally allowed herself to feel the ache in her muscles. Mason was alive. The rest would come later. The valley fell away beneath them. The firefight was over. For now, the helicopter banked hard toward Fort Granite's Field Hospital. Inside, medics hovered over Cole Mason, pumping fluids, clamping wounds, fighting the clock. Harper sat against the bulkhead, her rifle still in her hands, her gloves sticky with his blood. She said nothing about the fragment that had torn her side when they broke contact. The wound burned each time she breathed, but she pushed it away. Her men needed her steady. Ellis was gone, and that was weight enough. At the hospital, Mason disappeared behind swinging doors. Doctors barked orders. Nurses cut away shredded fabric. Harper stood outside for a long moment, then turned, refusing treatment. She walked back toward the flight line, her face set, her gear still smeared with dust. The official report arrived days later. It credited her with decisive leadership under fire. Her calm, her precision, her refusal to break when the fight tipped toward collapse. Command recommended her for advanced officer training at the Iron Crest leadership course. a program reserved for those the Army wanted to shape into future commanders. Her platoon sergeant, Marcus Doyle, found her in the mess hall. "Lane, they're saying you wrote the textbook out there." She shook her head, tray untouched before her. "Textbooks don't bleed." "Sergeant," he didn't argue. 7 months passed before Mason walked again without crutches. He endured surgeries, rehab, endless hours rebuilding the muscle shredded by bullets. When he finally rejoined the SEALs, his first mission was surgical. A targeted strike wiped out the cell that had laid the ambush in Redwood Basin. For Echo Team, it was closure. For Mason, it was proof that he was not finished. Harper, meanwhile, rotated into new theaters. Her squad boarded helicopters bound for desert cities, jungle trails, mountain ridges where the air itself clawed at their lungs. Each mission was precise, successful, and costly in ways no report could measure. She carried the weight quietly. Ellis's name carved into a plaque back at Fort Granite, the constant echo of gunfire that never seemed to fade when she closed her eyes. Her soldiers rotated home. Some left the service entirely. Harper stayed. Between deployments, she found herself in empty apartments, staring at blank walls. The silence pressed harder than combat ever had. The war had followed her back, shaping the way she looked at ordinary life. Crowds felt foreign, small talk useless. The gap between who she was in uniform and who she was without it grew wider each year. 3 years after Redwood Basin, on a night heavy with rain in Denver, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but instinct made her swipe. Staff Sergeant Lane. The voice was deeper now, steadier, but familiar in a way that hit like a round to the chest. She froze. "Yes. Who is this Cole Mason? You carried me out of that valley. I don't know if you remember." Her throat tightened. She leaned against the counter, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. "I remember." There was a pause. Then his words came soft but certain. "You saved my life. I never thanked you. I'd like to. Over dinner, no uniforms, just dinner." For the first time in years, Harper felt the edges of a smile. She answered simply, "All right, dinner." They met 2 nights later at a small brick-walled diner off Colfax Avenue. Neon lights buzzed outside. Inside, it smelled of coffee and fried food. Harper arrived in jeans and a plain jacket, hair tied back, sidearm left at home. Mason was already seated, leaning on a cane he no longer truly needed. Neither looked like the soldiers they were. To the other patrons, they were just 2 people meeting after work, but Harper saw the faint scars beneath his collar, and Mason saw the steel still in her eyes. The first minutes were awkward. He asked if she still ran with the Rangers. She nodded. She asked about his recovery. He said the surgeons had rebuilt him more times than he could count. Then silence fell. For a moment, it felt like the old weight would crush them again. But Mason reached into his pocket and placed a small patch on the table. "SEAL Team Echo," worn and faded. "I kept this," he said quietly, "because I could only carry it out thanks to you." Harper studied the patch, fingers brushing its edge. She didn't speak, but the look she gave him was enough. Respect, recognition, something unspoken that stretched back to the valley. Dinner stretched long into the night. They spoke of deployments without details, of bases that never made the news, of men they had buried and the ones still out there. Between stories, there were silences that didn't feel empty. When they finally stood to leave, rain still streaked the windows. Mason offered to walk her to her truck. She shook her head. "I've been fine on my own a long time." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you don't have to be anymore." Harper didn't answer. She only drove off into the wet night, headlights cutting through the dark. But something had shifted. The weight on her chest wasn't gone. Yet for the first time in years, it felt lighter. What began in blood and fire had taken a new shape, fragile and uncertain. They were no longer strangers, tied only by a mission report. They were two people who had survived the same storm and had chosen to meet again beyond it. The war never truly slowed. Harper rotated from one deployment to the next, and Cole Mason did the same. Yet the small diner in Denver had marked a turning point. From then on, their paths seemed to cross more often than chance could explain. At first, it was brief encounters, a planning cell in Norfolk, where Harper walked in and found Mason studying satellite imagery, a logistics briefing at Bagram, where his voice carried across the tent. Each time, there was recognition in their eyes, a flicker of the valley that bound them. Then came a joint exercise at Camp Hollow Creek. Rangers and SEALs trained side by side, testing readiness for missions neither side could run alone. The air smelled of pine and dust. Helicopters thundered low across the hills while squads maneuvered against mock opposition. Harper stood on the range, arms crossed, watching young recruits stumble through their first live-fire drills. Mason appeared beside her without warning. He leaned on the railing, nodding at a private whose hands shook too much on the trigger. "Reminds me of my first deployment. I thought the rifle weighed twice what it did." Harper smirked. "At least he's shooting in the right direction. That's progress." Their words carried no humor on the surface, but beneath, there was an ease neither had felt in years. Over the following days, they found themselves paired on evaluation teams. Long hours in control tents, meals grabbed between rotations, silent walks back to the barracks after midnight. Slowly, the distance between them thinned. Mason spoke first about loss. One evening, as the sun slid behind the ridges, he admitted what haunted him. "Two of mine died that day in Redwood. Not the bullets that hit me, those I could survive. It's the men I couldn't pull out. That never leaves." Harper let the silence hang before answering. "Ellis, private first class, 19 years old. He ran forward when no one else could. He didn't come back." Her voice tightened, and she looked away. "I carry him every time I lace my boots." They said no more, but from that night, there was an unspoken bond. A recognition that survival was not just about who lived, it was about who carried the weight of the dead. Months later, Mason shipped out on a long-term assignment. Before leaving, he handed Harper a sealed envelope. No explanation, only a steady look. She slipped it into her rucksack, unopened, as she boarded her next mission. Her deployment was brutal. A remote mountain raid, days of little sleep, weeks of tension that cracked even hardened soldiers. When she returned to base, grime still on her skin, she found the letter waiting in the bottom of her pack. She opened it alone, sitting under the dim light of her quarters. Mason's handwriting was sharp, deliberate, like each word had been chosen with care. "You saved me from a bullet, Lane, but outside the battlefield, I think you saved me from something worse, numbness. I had stopped feeling anything until you reminded me I was still human." She read it twice, then a third time. Her chest tightened, not from the ghosts of Ellis or the echoes of gunfire, but from something unfamiliar. Hope. The next time they met was at Hollow Creek again. Training cycles had drawn them both back. Harper spotted Mason across the yard, his uniform crisp, his scars barely visible now. She didn't wait. She walked straight to him, letter in hand. She didn't speak. She simply pressed the folded paper back into his palm. His eyes caught hers, and for a long moment, no words were needed. From then on, things shifted. What had been respect edged into something warmer. Their conversations stretched late into the night, wandering from tactics to music, from lost comrades to small fragments of normal life. Harper found herself laughing at stories Mason told about childhood summers on the coast. Mason learned Harper still painted in rare, quiet moments, sketches of landscapes no one else would see. They didn't announce it. There were no grand gestures, just two soldiers who, piece by piece, let down their guard. One winter evening, during another cycle at Hollow Creek, Mason asked her to walk past the barracks toward the chapel at the far end of camp. The night was still, snow crunching under their boots. Inside the chapel, only a few candles burned. A handful of comrades stood quietly, men and women who had bled with them in battles the public would never know. Mason turned to her, his voice steady but low. "Harper Lane, you pulled me out when death was certain. You've pulled me back, again and again. Since, I won't wait for another battlefield to decide what I feel. Will you marry me?" Her throat caught, but her answer was clear. Yes, and there was no orchestra, no audience of hundreds, only the sound of boots shifting on wooden floors, the flicker of candlelight, and the faint smell of gun oil still clinging to their uniforms. Doyle, her old platoon sergeant, nodded once from the back, his eyes proud but restrained. The small ceremony ended with a round of quiet applause, subdued but heartfelt. Mason slipped a simple band onto her finger. Harper looked at it, then at him, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. The next day, they went back to their units. No headlines, no announcements, just two warriors who had chosen each other in the midst of a world that rarely allowed choices. What had begun with fire and smoke in Redwood Basin had now taken root in something stronger, not built on fantasy, but on survival, trust, and the rare courage to let another person inside the walls built by war. Snow drifted lightly across the grounds of West Point. The Hudson River lay still below the cliffs, a sheet of steel under the winter sky. Inside St. Albans Chapel, candles flickered against ancient stone, casting warm light on pews filled not with dignitaries, but with soldiers who had once carried rifles beside Harper Lane and Cole Mason. The guest list was small by choice. Rangers sat shoulder to shoulder with SEALs. A flight medic who had kept Mason alive on that first helicopter ride was present, his hands folded in quiet reverence. The pilot who had flown them out of Redwood Basin stood in uniform at the back, eyes sharp even in peacetime. There were no reporters, no cameras, only those who knew the cost of the bond being sealed. Harper stepped into the antechamber, dress uniform pressed to perfection. On her chest gleamed the medal she had received after Redwood. It was not the shine of decoration that mattered, but what it represented: sacrifice, leadership, the moment she had chosen to run forward when others might have pulled back. She adjusted her gloves, drawing one long breath. In the mirror, her face showed both strength and scars. She had not chosen this path for applause. She had chosen it because Cole Mason had lived, and because Ellis had not. The medal was his as much as hers. Cole waited near the altar. His posture carried the quiet pride of a man who had endured and returned. A silver band of commendation lay across his chest, the ribbon marking wounds sustained in combat. His limp was slight now, but he had kept the cane polished, not hidden. To him, it was not weakness, but memory, a reminder of the valley where their lives had first crossed. The chapel doors creaked. Sergeant Marcus Doyle, older now, stepped forward. He had once ordered Harper into the fire. Today he extended his arm, steady as ever, to lead her down the aisle. She placed her hand on his sleeve, the gesture saying what words could not. Doyle had been the one who shaped her into the ranger capable of that rescue. Now he stood in for the father who could not be there. As they began the walk, the guests rose. Boots clicked against the stone floor, not in parade fashion, but in silent respect. Harper's eyes lifted once and met Mason's. The distance between them shortened with every step, but the memory of 3 years and countless missions lay in the space too. They reached the altar. Doyle gave a firm nod, then placed Harper's hand into Mason's. For a moment, Harper felt the weight of Ellis and the others, but then she looked at Mason, alive and steady before her, and the burden eased. The chaplain spoke the formal words, voice low and resonant under the vaulted ceiling. Yet when it came time for vows, Harper didn't look at the paper she had been given. She spoke from memory, her voice even but laced with fire. I once swore I would not leave you in the fire. Today I swear I will not leave you in the quiet days either. Wherever we are sent, whatever life demands, you will not stand alone. There was no murmur in the crowd, only the sound of someone exhaling sharply. Struck by the weight of her words, Mason then spoke, voice rough but unwavering. You carried me when I couldn't stand. You carried more than my body, you carried my will to live. Today I promise to carry us both. In war, in peace, in all the ground between. The chaplain gave the final blessing. Rings were exchanged, simple bands, unadorned, forged not for display but for meaning. Mason slid the ring onto her finger with steady hands. Harper returned the gesture, her touch firm, almost soldierly, yet tender beneath it all. Applause rose softly, restrained but heartfelt. It was not the cheer of a parade, but the acknowledgement of comrades who understood what it meant to survive, to serve, and to choose love despite it all. Afterward, in the small reception hall, there was no champagne tower, no glittering spectacle. Instead, metal cups clinked against wooden tables. Men and women shared toasts in voices cracked by years of shouting over gunfire. They spoke of the valley, of the night flights, of those not present. Ellis's name was spoken aloud, as was the name of Mason's two fallen teammates. Silence followed, the kind that honored more than any medal ever could. Doyle stood and gave the last toast. I once told Lane to push into hell itself. She did, and she pulled back a man who was never supposed to walk again. Today, she and Mason walk forward together. That's the mission now. And I'll be damned if it isn't the best one we've ever seen succeed. His voice broke at the edges, but no one missed a word. As the evening drew on, Harper and Mason stepped outside. The snow had thickened, blanketing the academy grounds in white. They walked together, side by side, the river below reflecting the faint glow of chapel windows. For the first time in years, both felt the strange calm of a battlefield left behind. They paused at the edge of the overlook. Harper tightened her jacket against the cold. Mason reached for her hand, fingers rough but warm. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said. The story of their wedding would never fill headlines. It would never be written in recruiting posters or broadcast across networks. But for those who had been their rangers, SEALs, pilots, medics, it would be remembered as something greater than ceremony. It was proof that the same courage that drives men and women into fire can also bind two lives beyond it. Some missions save lives, others save entire futures. In the valley of Redwood, Harper Lane had carried a wounded commander to safety. Years later, within the walls of St. Albans Chapel, she and Cole Mason carried each other into something far more enduring. And as the snow fell quietly on West Point, it was clear love can be born from the smoke of battle, and it can hold just as fiercely in the silence that follows.